Hi friends! Here in France the weather is pretty miserable. It's cold in the morning, rainy all day, and just generally not great weather. So what could be better than a nice bowl of soup in the evening to warm us up? Today I'm going to be showing you 3 different soup ideas that have protein and vegetables that are really good for you and that do the job of warming you up really well. Let me know in the comments below if you have any favourite Cosy soup recipes. If you've been following along here for a while, you may know that my butcher has minced beef on special offer on a Wednesday. So our Wednesday night dinners are usually based around minced beef, whether that's chili, spaghetti bolognese, sometimes lasagna or tacos, anything like that. We love to eat. But today it was cold and miserable, so I wanted to make a soup. So I'm kind of making this off the top of my head. I'm frying off some minced beef in the Instant Pot. I'm going to add 2 onions, 4 carrots, 1 large courgette, 2 garlic cloves, some herbe de Provence, and just a litre of water. Now, if I'd had chicken stock or bone broth, I would have added that, but I didn't have any of that to hand today. So I'm just going with water. I want to avoid shop bought broth if I can. To be honest, you don't compromise on taste by just using water, although you would get some nutritional benefits from using bone broth or meat stock. So I'm just cutting up these vegetables quite small so that they will cook quickly, but also you don't want to have 2 big chunks in soup because it makes it difficult to eat. I enjoy using my Instant Pot for this kind of recipe because I can saute everything directly in there and then it will just cook. I don't need to supervise it at all and it will keep it warm until we're ready to eat. In goes the garlic. I like to add this towards the end of the sauteing just so that it doesn't brown. I don't like the flavour of garlic when it's gone brown. I prefer to add it right at the end of the frying, right before I add any liquid. Next, I'm going to be adding some herbe de Provence, which I think goes really well with minced beef and the tomatoes in this soup. Now I'm adding some chopped tomatoes and I'm going to swid out both cans with just maybe half a can, a third of a can of water, just to make sure I get all of the tomatoes out of there. And then I will be adding 1 litre of water. And that will cook on high pressure for 30 minutes in the Instant Pot. Now, as I said, I'm making this up off the top of my head, but I have written it down for you. You can find all of today's recipes in the corresponding blog post, which I've linked in the description box below. If you want to bulk this soup out, you could add potatoes, you could add pasta towards the end of the cooking period, or some rice, or serve it in a bowl with just rice that's been cooked separately. Or you could have it with just bread and cheese, which is what we did this evening. This next soup was a real winner this week, and I'm starting off by making some chicken stock and by cooking the chicken in my Instant Pot. This way I get lovely tender chicken to go in the soup and some very nutritious chicken stock that will be the basis of the soup. I'm placing a whole chicken in my Instant Pot, about 10 peppercorns, 5 cloves, a few cloves of garlic that I'm just going to swill to make sure that they're clean, a tablespoon or two of apple cider vinegar, and then I'm just going to not quite cover the chicken. You don't want there to be too much liquid in there, otherwise the stock will not gel, and that's what we want. We want nice concentrated collagen in our meat stock. Mine didn't gel too well this time, so I think I need to put less liquid in there next time. You can also add some vegetables like an onion, some carrots, or maybe the greens of some leeks. What I tend to do is when I have leftover leeks and celery and that kind of thing, I'll put it in a freezer bag in the freezer until I'm ready to make some stock with it. I think I let that cook for about 45 minutes, but I'll try and find a recipe for you and I will link it in the description box below. And now I'm on to the coconut chicken soup. So I'm putting 1 litre of coconut milk in the pan to warm up while I prepare some vegetables. You can really use whichever vegetables you have in your fridge. So today I'm using a courgette, I'm using some carrots, some leftover butternut that I had in the fridge from last week. I'll add some green beans later, but you can also add leeks, peas, really whatever you fancy would go well in that. I love to have tomatoes in there sometimes, just maybe some cherry tomatoes or mushrooms. This is a really good recipe to empty your fridge with. Again, I'm cutting up those vegetables into bite-sized chunks so that they'll be easy to eat in the soup and they'll also cook quicker. All of the vegetables go into the coconut milk, and then I'm going to chop up some ginger and crush some garlic into there too. Now you can get the full recipe over on the blog. I have a recipe for coconut chicken which is not a soup. All I did this time was add a bit more liquid, a bit more coconut milk and a bit more stock. But you can use the recipe as a basis and make it into a soup. I will link that recipe in the description box below. In terms of seasoning, I'm using fish sauce. You could also use soy sauce, but I do prefer the flavour of fish sauce. I didn't have any lemongrass or kefir lime leaves today, so I didn't put any of those in, but they would also add a lot of flavour. Now I'm adding the chicken stock a little bit at a time because I didn't quite know how much I needed. I think I ended up pretty much putting 1 litre in there. So if you want a soup, 1 litre of coconut milk and 1 litre of chicken stock would be a good amount. And now I'm adding in those frozen beans just for a few extra vegetables, and I'm going to let that cook for probably 30 minutes. Just the butternut squash does need 30 minutes to cook, so just be aware of that. I also like to add a little bit of honey, about a tablespoon of honey, and about a tablespoon of rice vinegar. You could use lime juice instead of rice vinegar. I've done that in the past, but that little bit of acidity really helps all of the flavours to pop. Now once the chicken has cooked in the Instant Pot, I'm going to remove the meat from the bones. I need to let it cool a little bit first, obviously. And I'm going to cut it into bite-sized chunks and add it to the soup. So this doesn't need to cook again. You can add it right before you serve it if you're short on time. But if you've got cold meat, then you do need to bring the soup back to the boil and let it warm through thoroughly. I like to serve this with rice at the bottom of a bowl and the soup poured over the top, and a little sprinkle of coriander leaves to finish it all off. we're on to the last soup for today, and this is sausage and vegetable soup. It's become one of my absolute favourite soups. So hearty, so good for you. The sausages give it a really great flavour. So all you need are 2 onions that you're going to chop, 1 swede. Now, swede is one of those vegetables that many people don't think about using, and on its own it can be quite a strong flavour, but I think that in the soup with the other vegetables it goes really well. So 1 swede, 2 leeks, 8 carrots, and half a butternut. So that's all of the vegetables that you need. You can add other vegetables like potatoes or parsnips. I've done that in the past. Today I'm making it carb free, so potatoes and parsnips aren't an option. I like to fry the vegetables first so that they're softened and slightly brown. I start with the onions and then I add the leeks, then carrots, and then the swede and the butternut at the end. And as usual, I add the garlic right before I add the liquid. Make sure you chop your vegetables into bite-sized chunks so that they're easy to eat. Now I'm adding about 1.5 litres of the chicken stock that I made yesterday. I'm going to give it a good stir and let it cook for at least 30 minutes. You do need to keep an eye on the butternut and the swede because they might take a little bit longer, but that's also the reason why you want them cut up quite small so that they will cook quicker. As always, you do need to add plenty of salt, especially if you're using homemade chicken stock or bone broth because it's generally not salted. Be aware with this soup that because we're adding sausages at the end, they do have a little bit of salt in them, so maybe undersalt the vegetable part and adjust the seasoning before you serve. Now I'm going to fry the sausages separately. These are sausages that come direct from a farm. They have very little fat in them, which is why I'm putting oil in the pan. Sometimes sausages can be very fatty, so you might not need to oil the pan before you fry them. I'm cooking these gently so that they get really well cooked all the way through without burning. It took probably 20 minutes for those sausages to cook because they are really quite big. One of my very favourite things to serve with soup are these cheese scones, and I like to make them sourdough just for that extra tanginess and health benefits. If you're sensitive to gluten, you can make them the day before and leave them fermenting in the fridge. Just maybe don't add the baking powder right away. You can add that at the end before you put them in the oven. You can get the recipe for this over on my blog post, and hopefully I will have a dedicated blog post to this recipe very soon. To make these savoury scones, you need 300 grams of plain flour, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 85 grams of butter, which you are going to mix up in a food processor or with your fingertips until they resemble breadcrumbs. I'm adding a teaspoon of herbe de Provence to that breadcrumb-like mixture. And then I'm going to be doing the wet ingredients. So I've warmed up 100 milliliters of milk. I'm adding about a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar to the milk so that it will curdle. And then I'm going to be adding those wet ingredients, so the milk mixture, the starter, some mustard, to the dry ingredients, and then just mix it up very, very quickly in the food processor or with your hands. You don't want to overwork this dough, otherwise it'll be tough. So I mix it until it's only just mixed together. Adding mustard is something that I learnt from my mum. The mustard flavour brings out the cheese flavour for some reason. I don't quite know why, but I do like to add some mustard to anything that I'm making with cheese. And I'm putting the cheese in there too. There's about 150 grams of cheese there. I'm saving a little bit to sprinkle on the top of the scones. So it's probably 100 grams in the mixture and 50 grams to go on the top. Once the mixture is mixed up, I'm flouring my work surface and I'm going to finish mixing it by folding it over, and this will create almost layers that will really help the scones to rise. So I just fold it over a couple of times before I shape it, and I'm going to shape it into a round shape that's about an inch thick, so 2.5 centimeters thick. And then I will cut it into 8 pieces and bake it in the oven. So while I've been preparing these scones, the oven has been preheating to 200 degrees Celsius, and I've preheated it with the baking tray in there. And that's another secret that I got from my mum. Preheating the baking tray will help the scones to rise. So that's something you really want to make sure you do. Before you put the scones in the oven to bake, make sure your baking tray is nice and hot. Here I'm using my bench scraper or dough cutter. This is one of my absolute favourite tools to use in the kitchen, especially for sourdough and any kind of baking. It's made my life so much easier, so I'll link that in the description box below for you. I'm going to glaze these scones with a little bit of milk. That will give them a nice colour, and it will also help the cheese to stick. And then I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of that leftover cheddar cheese on the top. These will bake in the oven for about 18 minutes until they're nice and golden brown. Now going back to the soup, I remove a couple of large spoons of the vegetable chunks because I'm going to mix up the rest, and I do want to have a little bit of texture in this soup, so I'm reserving some of the chunks of vegetables to one side, but I'm going to mix up the rest to make a nice thick hearty soup. I'm adding those vegetable chunks back into the soup, giving it a good stir, and then I'm going to start cutting up the sausages. So I slice them into 4 lengthways, and then I will cut chunks from those 4 pieces. I'm going to add those sausage chunks back to the soup and make sure everything's nice and hot before I serve. I love serving this delicious hearty soup with those cheese scones. I serve them warm with a lot of salted butter on there that melts into the scones. It's absolutely delicious. Thanks for joining me today. If you want more content like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and I'll see you next time. Bye!